Howdy! In this video, we're going to take a deep dive session into how to hook up your Gatsby website with Netlify. So we'll be setting up a CiCd pipeline, then we'll be looking at preview. Now this video is going to be about 25 to 30 minutes long. It's not going to be one of those set everything up in 3 seconds jobbies, because I'm going to walk you through everything you need to know, the errors, the nuances, everything. So this video is going to make you an expert. Now, if you haven't come across my channel before, then I recommend that you smash on the subscribe button right now before we move on. I am John and I do a weekly video that will help you become a better programmer and a better web developer. So if that sounds good to you, smash subscribe now. Also, if you want to learn more about Contentful, I've written a book which is called Contentful, The Missing Manual. It's available on LeanPub and it's only $9.99, and it will go into complete detail about Contentful and content modeling and all that good stuff. So assuming you've smashed subscribe, bought the book, yada yada yada, let's get on and actually do this deep dive on how we can set things up in Netlify. We're going to start off looking in our Gatsby project and thinking about how we can push our code into Netlify. Now, the first thing that we need to do is create a brand new file. And this is the netlify.toml file that you can see here. And it's within this Netlify toml file that we're going to define our CiCd pipeline. So let's take a look at how I've configured this file for our Gatsby project. The Netlify toml file is the main configuration file that will define how Netlify builds and deploys your site. Now, Netlify has support for configuration including redirects, build commands, context-specific settings, plugins, and much more. And if you're interested to learn about everything you can do inside of Netlify toml, then I recommend that you go over to the dev docs at Netlify and find the page which is called File-Based Configuration, and from here you're going to find everything you need to get going. Now, for my Gatsby site, I've added a few key bits of configuration. Now, in the first block here, I've defined a simple build pipeline. Now, this block tells Netlify that it should run the Gatsby build command whenever the site needs to be built. So, for example, when a new git commit is made in source control. Now, the second command here tells Netlify which folder it should use as the output folder. And remember, within Gatsby, the public folder is where your end website files will eventually be located. Now, the second block here deals with the dev command. Now, you might be rightly wondering why we have a dev block and a build block. And the reason for this is to do with local debugging. Now, if you tried to make every single change, pushed it into Netlify, waited the 5 minutes for things to compile, it's going to take you forever. Instead, it's going to be much quicker and efficient for you to be able to test and validate how your site works in Netlify locally. And in order to emulate Netlify locally, you're going to need to learn about the Netlify-CLI tool. Now, the Netlify CLI tool does allow you to do more things than just emulate your site locally. However, for me, this is the #1 reason why I typically install it. Now, in order to install the CLI locally, you can just run an npm install netlify-cli. And because this tool needs to work with multiple projects, you'll need to use the global flag so you can use it against any project you create. Then, in order to build your site locally using Netlify CLI, super simple, all we do is netlify dev, off we go. What you'll see now is that it's going to run that build command, which is going to do a Gatsby develop. It's going to pick up all our environment variables, it's going to load our plugins, and then what it should do is open everything on port 8000 for us, so then we can work on it. So jumping back to our toml file, you'll now hopefully appreciate this second dev block will allow you to define how you work with your site locally when debugging. After that, I've defined a third block, and this is just basically an example of how you can set up redirects. So let's say that you wanted to set up a 401 redirect, you can do it all in here. And finally, the last thing I want to point out is the plugins block. Now, out of the box, Netlify has a bunch of build plugins that will help you build your sites easier, and it has one specifically for Gatsby. Now, the main reason why you want to install the Netlify Gatsby plugin is because it will allow you to more easily work with Gatsby functions in Netlify. So the Gatsby build plugin will provide you access to serverless functions within your Gatsby file structure, allowing you to quickly set up your serverless APIs. So let's quickly have a look at this working. So remember, in order to create a serverless function, we should be putting it in a folder called API within source. In here, I've created a very basic test function. So all it does is return the text hi. Now I've gone ahead and built on my site, and we'll cover how to do that later. We can see that after my site's been built, all I need to do is my domain name /API/test, and everything's been hooked up for me, build process working. And this is the magic of using that Gatsby build plugin, because all of this is taken care of for you and you don't need to worry about it all. And that's the reason why you should always install it whenever you're using Gatsby. And before we move on to that deployment stage, the final tip I want to give you is how you can work with that TOML file a little easier in VS Code. Out of the box, Visual Studio Code won't know what a .toml file is, and it won't know how to parse it. Now, on the screen, you can see that I've got a nicely color coordinated file. And to make your life a little bit easier when working with TOML, I recommend that you install an extension so you can actually debug things and get useful information. So in order to do this, go to the extension marketplace. From here, you can see that I've got this better TOML. This has been downloaded something like 1.5 million times. So once you install this, you'll get a nice color formatted file instead of just a plain black and white file. And I'd say that this is a very useful tip. However, it's very easy to overlook to do. So what we're going to do in this section is I'm going to run you through how to set everything up in Netlify. Now in the first pass, I'm going to assume that everything went okay. And then towards the end, I'm going to go through some hidden gotchas and some common build failures. I'm going to walk through how you can fix them. So if everything doesn't work for you, look at the second part of this section because it will help. So what we're going to do is head over to Netlify, log in, create an account, and then once you get to the home page, the first thing you're going to see is this add new site. So click on that, import an existing project. Now from here you can see that we can hook up with GitHub, GitLab, DevOps. So let's go GitHub. Then from the list that appears, I should be able to do Gatsby and search all of my repositories for my repo. And you can see from here, I've got my Gatsby Contentful Netlify. Now, when it comes to hooking everything up, you can see I can define an owner. I can define what's the master branch. Then all this information is going to get pulled in from our Netlify TOML. And all I need to do is click on deploy site. Now, one of the interesting things about Netlify is that the build process will generate your website a random name that you can use. Now, you can find this name in the site overview. You can see that mine is charming-druid-5bc5e7.netlify app. Now, I'm assuming most people will want to use a custom domain, which you can do from the domain settings. However, if you're doing this for a hobby project, you can actually give this a better name. So let's say that we go to site settings. What we can do here is change the site name. So what I want to do now is call mine Gatsby Contentful Netlify. And then assuming nothing else has taken this name, when I click save, it should save. So you can see this site name is already taken. So when this happens, we can just give it a brand new name, click save, and hopefully this should save. And straight away you can see I've now got a much more easy to remember URL. Clicking on this, you can see that my website loads as expected. Now, after I've got everything set up perfectly, the second thing that I like to do is set up a little notification in my GitHub so I can actually see the build status whenever I'm looking at my source code. And I find this saves me loads of time. Now, Netlify does this using one simple snippet of Markdown. And to get going, what you want to do is go to the site settings. Now on site settings, you just need to scroll down until you find this status bar area. And all we need to do is copy this jobby right here. Now all we need to do is go back to our build. Then if we go to our readme.md, within here we can then paste in that bit of Markdown, and using this command, you'll now get your build status within GitHub without you having to do anything. So the process that we've gone through so far can be considered the dream ideal scenario, because we set up a new site, there's been no build errors whatsoever, and things have just worked. However, in reality, we all know that when we set things up the first time, things can go wrong. So what we're going to do now is look at a few common errors that you'll likely encounter and see how we can actually fix them. Now, over the years, one issue that I've bumped into a fair few times now is this node error. that Gatsby requires node ... or higher, and you have ... Now we can fix this again within the netlify.toml file. Fixing node version issues is super simple. Head back over to our Netlify toml, and you can see here that I've added in a brand new block, which is the build.environment. Within here, you can just add in a brand new variable called node_version. And from here, you can just add in or set the exact version of node that you want to work with. And doing this should resolve any node mismatch errors that you might bump into. Now, a second issue that you'll likely bump into is environment variables. If you set your environment variables locally and you haven't committed them into source code, you'll need to add them in Netlify. And you can do this via the portal. So fixing missing environment variables is really simple. All you want to do in your build screen is go to site settings. Now from site settings, you can see that we have this option of environment variables. Now from environment variables, click on that and you've got the ability to add either a single variable or import from an M file. So let's say that we've already got our M file set up. Click on this. All we then need to do is go back to our environment variable in our project. Let's copy everything. Now let's just paste it in there. Then we click on import variables and you can see we've updated it. Now when we run our build process again, everything should go through, no worries. So far, you've learned how to set everything up within the UI. However, it's also possible to publish and update your site via the Netlify CLI. Now, one interesting thing though, if I just do Netlify build, we'll get an error. Now the reason for this is that I haven't linked up my project to my Netlify project yet. Now you can see here, cannot find the site ID, please run Netlify link. So if I run Netlify link now, what we'll do is get a little command, and then this command is going to say, how do I connect to Netlify? So I'm going to use my git remote origin. There we go. Now it's looking for sites connected to this repository. Now, after you have your Netlify project and your code hooked up, you can then do some interesting things. So we can do things like a Netlify build. And this statement is going to allow you to test what a production build on Netlify will look like locally. Secondly, we can even do a deployment. And as you can see on screen, we can also do a Netlify deploy. So a deploy will push our code into production in a preview branch. This will allow you to see what those changes are like. And then by adding in the --prod flag, we can then publish that to production. And as you'll see within the UI, you can see that our publish date has now been updated. So the takeaway is that when you're thinking about setting up a CiCd pipeline with Netlify and Gatsby, you'll want to make use of the Netlify CLI tool to make your life much easier. So far, everything is looking pretty sweet. However, we have one slight issue. How do we preview content before it's been published? Now, in a traditional CMS system, preview has always been a fairly simple problem to solve. However, in a headless powered website, things are not as straightforward as they once were. Now, the culprit for this new complexity is there are now multiple ways to generate web pages: static site generation and server-side rendering. Now, the great thing about server-side rendering are that pages are generated on demand, and this makes preview pretty easy. Now, in static site generation, pages are created at build time, which makes preview more complicated. Now, due to these rendering approaches, it's possible to configure preview within Gatsby and Contentful in several ways. And today my plan is to walk you through how you can see preview content on your local machine while developing. I'll also show you how to enable preview in production for pages that are statically generated. Now, these aren't the only ways that you can do preview, so I'll wrap this section off by quickly going over some of the other alternatives that you might want to consider. We're now back inside of Contentful, and the first type of preview that we're going to set up is accessing preview content in our local development project. So in order to get going, we need to think about API keys. So remember, we can access our API keys from the API setting. Okay, So in order to get Gatsby and Contentful to talk together nicely, we needed to come into Contentful, generate some keys, and then add them as environment variables within our project. So from the screen, you can see the keys that we needed to access. So what we did is we copied the space ID and the content delivery access token. And the caveat with this API key is that it won't give you access to either preview content or content created in draft mode that is yet to be published. However, in order to get preview working, we need this type of content. So what are we going to do? So this is why in a preview setup, we need to worry about the content preview API access token. So this access token will give us access to that draft content. So what we need to do is copy this key and then add it as an environment variable within our project and then configure Gatsby config to use it correctly. So jumping back into our code, there's a few tweaks we need to make. So we're going to start with our environment variables. So when I set this up originally, we used the space ID, which hasn't changed, and I used the master access token. So you'll want to swap this in development at least for your preview access token. Now, the interesting thing about using a preview access token is that if you don't set the host correctly, you're going to get an access error. So what you'll need to do is set up a brand new environment variable, which is called contentful_host, or name it whatever you want. And the domain you need to use is preview.contentful.com. So I can't stress this enough. If you don't set this host correctly, you will not be able to communicate back to Contentful and you're going to get an error. Now, the final thing that we really need to do is this jobby here. So this enable-gatsby-refresh-endpoint equals true. And by turning on that flag, you're going to enable a brand new route in your application, which you can access with __refresh. So I've got an example in Postman of the endpoint that gets enabled. You can see that I'm making a post request. You can see that I've got my normal dev URL. And at the end of it, I've got __/refresh. So that environment variable will enable this route, and this is key for preview to work. We now need to go back into Gatsby-config in order to update this Gatsby-source-contentful setting to work with our new environment variables. So you should already have the space ID and the access token. The new ones that we need to add is host. So process.env contentful host. So this should be that preview.contentful.com. Then if you want to, you can also enable an environment. So in Contentful, by default, you'll get one environment, which is the master one. However, in order to do preview, you might want to create a preview environment. So you can also do a process.env.contentful environment. So we're going to start off just getting preview working in development, and then we can worry about Netlify later. So switching back into the Contentful CMS, I've created a brand new page of type homepage, and it's called new page. So as you can see, we've got this new page ... and then we've got the slug of new. And when we go into our site here, we've got blog new, and then we're rendering out our content. So what I want to do now is then update these like this. So what I want to do is see these brand new updates. Now in Contentful, hopefully you can see this. You can see that I've got the option of publishing changes or unpublishing changes. However, I don't want to publish these changes because once you publish something, it's going to go live into production. So if I go back to my website, you can see that I'm refreshing it. Oh, now we've got this difference. So I've updated something here, but I haven't seen it here. And this is why we needed to enable that endpoint. So if I open up my Postmans, I'm now going to do a post request to that __refresh. And then moving back to our page, you should be able to see that we've now updated everything. So let's do that again for us. We're going to go back to ... So you can see that this hasn't updated. I'm going to refresh the page. Nothing's changed. Opening back into Postman, doing my refresh. You can see that it gets automatically updated. So hopefully that all makes sense, and let's recap things. So locally, I'm running Gatsby develop, and this means I'm running my website in a Node instance. With my site running in Node, I can then call the __refresh endpoint. This is then going to invalidate the cache, and then my preview content will be refreshed so I can see the updated changes in my website easily. Now, unfortunately, when we move into Netlify and Contentful, because pages will be statically generated, we're not going to have our website running in a Node instance. Instead, we're just going to have the end statically generated pages to play with. This means that we can't just use the same technique in production that we just did in development. Instead, we're going to need to use a different technique in order to get Preview to work. So let's have a look at what this might look like. So jumping back into Netlify, what you need to do is set up a brand new site. So hopefully you'll see here, I've got one for my production and then I've got one for my preview. Now, just in terms of setting up this new preview site, the steps are exactly the same as we followed before. The only difference is the environment variables. So again, site settings, go down to the environment variables. Now, yes, we can import them, but what we need to cover is this. So first off, we've got our access token, and remember this now needs to be our preview one. Then we've got our Contentful host. So remember this is preview.contentful.com. Now we don't need to use this Gatsby refresh endpoint. I've just copied it in. And then the other important one is the space ID. So this is going to be the same regardless of the site. And after we have our preview site set up with all of those custom environment variables, we're free to go into Contentful and now create a preview inside Contentful that should work. So we're now back inside the CMS and it's time to set preview up. However, this is probably a great time to add in a caveat that when it comes to previewing static pages with Gatsby in real time, things aren't ideal. So the first thing we want to do is just set up preview. So quickly, let's look at that. So the first thing we want to do is enable content preview. And the reason why we need to do this is that this live preview button here won't work unless you set this up. So what we want to do is settings, and then we want to go to content preview. And then in here, what you'll need to do is create up a new preview. So I've created one already, called it preview. And what you need to do is that for each content model that you want to preview, you'll need to map it to a URL. So from here, you can see that I've got my homepage content model. I've added in my preview URL, and assuming you've seen the previous videos in this series, the URL to access my blogs start from /blog, and then it's the slug. So enabling this means that once we go into a piece of content, this open live preview will work as expected and everything's beautiful. Now, because Gatsby is a static site generator, preview isn't as straightforward as if we're using server-side rendered applications. So this is the reason why we need to install an additional marketplace app by Netlify. And in order to install this app, go to apps at the top here, go to the marketplace, and then from the marketplace, you can just do a search for Netlify. So you should see this app, which is easily build and preview sites with Netlify. So preview is in the name. So clicking on this will give you the option to install it. I've already got mine installed, so I've just got configure, but you should see an install app button here. Now clicking on this for the first time, you'll need to basically wire up Netlify. So what we want to do is click on connect. This is going to then launch a little drop down. I can authorize Netlify, jobs are good. Now, after I've authorized Netlify, the next thing that I need to do is set up a site. And basically each site that you want to be able to build or preview, you need to set up here. So in order to do this, click on the add other site. From here, you just want to pick the site in Netlify you want to work with, give it a name, and then you want to tick when assets are unpublished, published, and when entries are unpublished, published. And the final key bit to this is defining when you want the Netlify build plugin to appear in Contentful. And you do that by enabling which content models you want it to work with in the sidebar. So for me, I've only got one content model, homepage. So now I just click save and off I go. Now all I need to do is switch to my content tab. And what you'll see is now I've got the ability to do this build directly in the sidebar for my content type. And this is a key bit of making preview work within Gatsby. So let's quickly run through why we need this build plugin. So I've got my page, which is update ... update ... And then let's say that I'm going to update this to new page. Now, if I click on my open live preview, what we'll see is that our site opens. However, we're still seeing the published content. Now, the reason why we're seeing this is because it's a statically generated site. And the only way that we can update this content is to regenerate the pages. So if we close down the preview, then if we go to the build website, kick this off, what will happen is that if we go into Netlify, we'll see a build being triggered. As we're talking about a build here, it's going to take 3 to 5 minutes for it to build. After we successfully finished, we can then log back into Contentful. You can see here that the build Netlify tab has stopped processing, and when we click the live preview, you guessed it, we're going to see our updated changes. Now, the important thing to still remember is that this content is still preview content. As we can see here, we've got the change status, but it's not been published. So we can still see our preview. However, I think we can agree this waiting 3 to 5 minutes to see any change is not ideal. So, as I'm hoping you can now appreciate, preview when it comes to static site generation isn't ideal. Basically, what we need to do is use the preview access tokens. We then need to trigger a build and wait before we can preview anything. Now, the great thing about SSR is we can see our updates in real time. However, it's not really possible to run your site using SSR in Netlify itself. Now, you might be wondering what would happen if you just did Gatsby develop on your preview site as the build instruction. And sadly, if you do this, what's going to happen is the build process is just going to hang and it's not going to deploy anything. So one solution to this dilemma is to basically run your own Gatsby preview server. So this might be within a Docker container. However, you might want to use the Gatsby Cloud Preview. So this is a managed service which comes with Gatsby Cloud. Again, this isn't really using Netlify. However, it is an alternative which is probably going to give you a slightly better preview. Now, granted, setting up your own development server or even using Gatsby Cloud might not be ideal. So for some people, you might want to consider setting up preview by making use of Contentful's environment feature. So remember when we set up our environment variables, we set up one which is called environment. So what we could do is do all of our preview content in a new environment called preview and then switch this in our application layer. Now, one way of transferring content between these two different environments is via the CLI. However, Contentful also now has this ability to do merge. So you can see here, compare and merge content models across environments. So this can make things a little bit easier. However, it's still a bit of a pain and not ideal. So yes, that was a bit of information overload for a single video. However, I'm hoping this deep dive into the build process and preview has been useful for you. Now this, if I'm honest, is probably my last video that I'm planning on doing Gatsby. However, that can change. If you found this series super useful and you want me to do more deep dive sessions, then let me know by smashing on the like button right now and leaving a comment and let me know what topics you think I should cover. So again, if you have found value of this video and you want to learn more about web development, don't forget to click on the subscribe button. And if you haven't checked out the first part of this video yet, then the link to that video is on screen. So check that out because it covers everything you need to know in order to install Gatsby and Contentful together. Otherwise, I hope you're having an epic day wherever you are. And until next Sunday's video, happy coding.